Well, I just want to welcome everyone to a conversation on compassion with Sri M. And I'd really love to introduce you to his work because his work and who he is has influenced me in many ways. As many of you know who have participated in our conversations on compassion, by viewing these conversations, we speak about the influence of spirituality in regard to human flourishing. We talk about the science of compassion and also discuss how we are finding a connection between who we are as human beings, both in the context of how we have evolved as a species and how each of us has integrated spirituality into our lives, and it has had a huge effect on many people. That being said, when you're on this path, you don't necessarily need to have a guru or even have a dogma that you practice. And what we have found through our research on the science of compassion is that goodness, caring, compassion has a profound positive impact on our physiology. Just as caring for others in the context of almost every religious practice has a profound influence. So without further ado, we're going to begin our conversation. So maybe we can just begin. Thank you for spending some time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I know many of your followers know your history, and you've done, I guess, 2 autobiographies. And more recently, we were discussing before we started our conversation on your new book, Sunya, which, as I understand, means the void.
Void, yes.
Yes. So before we talk about that, which I'm very interested in talking about, I'd like to talk about your own life. And because you began as a member of a Muslim family, and in fact...
Born into one.
Yes, but you still go by the name Mumtaz Ali Khan.
In my passport, Mumtaz Ali is the name in my passport and my visa.
Now, you talk about, though, in the face of that, though, you also had a grandmother who was interested in Sufism.
Right.
And you specifically talk about that. How did that impact, you think, as a child to you?
Actually, it did have a, maybe in some way responsible that I turned into the internal aspects of Islam. The Sufis were guys who kind of rebelled and came on and said, we need to have a personal communication with whatever you're looking at or worshipping. So my grandmother used to tell me beautiful Sufi stories about various people, including her relatives. Her father was her teacher, who actually was, in those days, an educated man, who was the superintendent of the jails in Trivandrum. And the compassion he had is very interesting. In spite of warnings, he used to go into the cell and have long conversations, cup of tea, with life imprisonment or sentenced to death prisoners. People warned him, this is not good for you, because, but then one day a prisoner who was on the death row, maybe 3 days later he would have been hanged, he stabbed him, and it was on his left knee. Nobody knew he had diabetes. So the wound became gangrenous, and they had to amputate. He died because things were not so advanced in this little city there in Trivandrum. So I've been listening to all these stories, perhaps that might have turned my mind into something more serious than the externals. My grandmother never worshipped 5 times a day or anything of that kind, but she was a very religious person, deeply, yes.
Well, it's unusual for someone, I think you were at the age of 9 when you actually had a visitation. And it's interesting because I think in your second book, I think, what was your quote, that people will think you went bonkers, but maybe you went bonkers earlier.
Yeah, much earlier actually.
Yeah. So what was that experience? Because you had a manifestation of, I think, Sri Babaji.
If I may correct, it was not a manifestation. I actually saw, it was physical. It was not as if he came out of a light or anything of the kind. He was standing in the backyard of my house under the jackfruit tree, which was like we are sitting here, as real as you sitting here. But it lasted only for a short while, and I think he walked away from the back door, but I'm not sure because I couldn't turn and look. So this is what happened.
But clearly it had a profound effect on you.
Certainly, it changed. Already I was thinking a little I was becoming more introvert, but with this, he touched me on my head with his right hand. And he said, as time goes by, we'll come to this. I don't know what this was. I was quite, it was a mystery to me. But after that, I found I was spending more time, increasingly more time, sitting quietly, looking up at the sky. And we never know about the Himalayas. We're in the south of India. But I always thought the clouds were like this snow-clad mountain. There was something going on, I can tell you this. And I started meditating. Nobody had taught me how to meditate. I used to lie down at night, wake up at midnight, and in the same posture as lying down, I used to meditate here in this center, and something used to, a light used to kind of expand and circulate, and it was very blissful. And this continued maybe till early in the morning, when I used to kind of wake up as if I was waking up from a natural sleep. So yes, this thing started happening. Plus, I started reading more of this literature on yoga, meditation, Vedanta. The public library, which was started by the Maharajas of Travancore, is a big library. It's an old place. I found a librarian who was very helpful. So he used to always, hey, read this now. Read this. So this started also happening side by side.
Now, that's probably somewhat unusual, not because you were Muslim, but because that was your family's faith.
Absolutely.
And how did they respond to this behavior? Because that's a very...
I had to pass through a tough time, to be honest. Although my father was an educated man, and he was a philosophy graduate from the Maharajas College, so he kind of figured out something. My mother, she was very fond of me, much more than anybody else, but she couldn't get
that's what mothers do.
Yeah, exactly. But she couldn't get to terms with this.
Sure.
You know what's happening. And then you know what happened. If you have probably read the autobiography, at the age of 19, I ran away, literally. I felt suffocated. I felt like I was in a cage. It was a very good cage, believe me, gold gilded cage, because financially we were quite well off. And I had no problems, but I had a problem which was internal. I had to go to a place where I could indulge in my interests with no constraints whatsoever. So I always read about the Himalayas. I started reading the autobiography of Yogi, the Himalayan trips of some of the other yogis who existed at that time, and so on. And one day I decided, if I don't go now, I can't go. So I just, without informing anybody, I just left.
Now, by this time, though, had you already searched out different gurus and interacted with them, or was this part of that initial path?
No. Till the age of 19, I had met many of the spiritual teachers in and around Trivandrum city. In and out. Madanappally is now, I am settled in Andhra Pradesh now. This is in Kerala. I was born and brought up in the capital city of Kerala, Trivandrum. So there were some people, not so well known, but I used to go and spend time. They were very fond of me. So I used to spend time, and they knew who I was, because in a small city, you know, everybody knows who owns a car, because there were few cars, this kind of thing. So they were very fond of me. I went and talked to them, sat with them, ate with them, and I learned many things, but I didn't feel they were my teachers. I thought there was somebody waiting somewhere, perhaps, and maybe it's the same person I met at the age of 9 for 10 minutes. This was kind of eating me up inside, and I just had to do it. But I did read some books before that, because till the age of 19, from 9 to 19 is the time when you really read books. The 16, 17, British Council was close by the library, so I used to go and read voraciously. In fact, I hardly read for my exams. Somehow I passed through, but mostly I was spending time with books which you don't need for the exam. Anyhow, so this is how it was.
So that period of time after you left, how long was it before you met your guru?
So now, you know, I had to depend on railway maps and things. There were no Google, nothing at that point. So it's like a exploration, really. So I had some money. So I went by train, then by bus, and so I landed at Haridwar, which is the beginning of the Himalayan foothills. And then from there to Rishikesh, and then I used to walk. I had around 12 rupees, Indian rupees left when I reached Haridwar. I thought that if I keep this money with me, then I'm dependent on it. Can I do it without? Let's try. If you don't eat 2 days, you're not going to die. So I distributed it to there were hundreds of sadhus in Haridwar. And then I started walking. Yeah, I took a train from Haridwar to Rishikesh, and then I started. Stayed in the Shivananda ashram and various well-known ashrams for a few days, here, there, maybe a month at the most, and then kept walking. And it was sometimes very bad. I loved the walk. It took me around a month to reach Badrinath. It's about 200 kilometers. It took me about a month. Because I had to halt here and there, then my legs got all cut and sore. But it was still wonderful experience. For the first time, I felt like a bird out of its cage, you know, flying. I didn't have any very profound spiritual experience, but my mind was so glad and so thrilled. And it's you know that it's a beautiful terrain. So let me add one more thing, that cannabis grows widely in the Himalayas. I didn't try any.
Were you motivated to go to the Himalayas because you imagined it, or you were guided there, or do you still?
I don't know if I was guided there, but I had my imagination full of the Himalayas. But as I went along, I found that I couldn't find what I was looking for. I thought, because I thought that the Himalayan snow-clad peaks started from Rishikesh. Not true. So till I saw in Kedar and Badrinath, there was no snow anywhere. So I was a little bit disappointed, and I didn't see the kind of yogis I thought I would see in my imagination. I met many good people, many learned people. Swami Chidananda of the Divine Life Society in Rishikesh was a very learned man, very nice man. But he told me, I don't think you're going to fit in here. Maybe you're going upwards in the upper Himalayas. Watch out for frauds. This is the warning he gave me. So anyway, but there was this irresistible pull to go to the upper Himalayas. That, of course, could be that I was being pulled. At that time I was not aware. Now, in retrospect, I think perhaps so. Because I met Maheshwarnath Babaji, who was my guru. Not the Babaji, but his disciple from the Nath Sampradaya. There is a very old tradition called the Naths, starting with Adinath, Gorakhnath, and so on. So I met him in this cave in Vyasa Gufa when I was so disappointed that I want to take my life. At that point, he came into the picture. I met him in the cave. And for 2.5, 3 years, a little more than 3 years, I spent with him. he was a wonderful man because, he had no banner, he had no organization. He just had a white cloth, loin cloth, and he was barefoot. And so I walked with him. Even today I can tell you there are places where no tourist knows exist. So this was how it started. And when I met him, I said, I thought it's the same person I met when I was 9 because his eyes were very, hypnotic. I had never forgotten those eyes, big eyes. And so I said, I won't leave you ever. So he smiled and said in Hindi, Dekha jayega, which means we'll see what happens. So this is what happened. This was in Badrinath. Mm-hmm.
It sounds as though when you met him, you had a feel about him. But did he have a specific teaching or dogma, or was the nature of his presence, if you will?
For the first time when I saw him, I didn't know anything about what he taught, but there was something that made me feel that he was like my own, like my father, mother, brother, sisters, all put together, like also a friend. There was this instant feeling that, I found this man, which I was missing. This is what the thought that occurred to me. But gradually, as I lived with him, I figured out from his own discussions that he belonged to this ancient order of the Naths, from Matsyendranath downwards. But even though he was a Nath, he came from that tradition, but he was familiar with all other traditions, and he had nothing against anybody. That was wonderful. Plus, he was, according to him, a senior disciple of someone we call Sri Guru Babaji, who is almost a semi-mythical figure. Let me put it this way, because nobody knows much about this except what people have painted pictures and talked about. Hardly people know much. But this man was flesh and blood. He was not a phantom. So, and the Nath Sampradaya, I'm sure you know about this, but there was a time when, they wear these rings here, they called split-eared yogis. They wear these rings here, and they have usually matted hair, and they always have a fire wherever they go. They call it the dhuni. So I was also introduced. I also used to wear, but I took it off because Babaji said when I went back home, I sometimes wear when I feel the fancy for it, but generally. So, and his hair was somewhat like this, but much bigger. So, there was a time in the history of Indian spirituality that the Vedantins of Shankara's order and so on kind of started neglecting the practice of yoga as such, saying that if you understand that the world is an illusion and then Brahman is the reality, and if you keep thinking about it, what Shankara called as Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, then one day you will arrive that there is no need of doing any yoga. They said it is gymnastics, this, that. So this was a time, which is not true actually, because you may theoretically understand that, but you need to adapt your mind and brain and body to understand this as an experience, which you need to do something about it. This is yoga, but this was the trend at that time. So that's the time when the Yogi Sampradaya of the Naths, N-A-T-H-S, Naths, starting, we believe that Shiva himself, who is called Adinath, which of course is a mythical figure, and the next Matsyendranath, who is not so mythical, and then Gorakhnath, who is a historical person, were the people who started this whole lineage of yoga, and they saved yoga from being thrown away by the Vedantins. And the important textbooks on yoga, except the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, which we don't know who wrote. Patanjali was basically a yogi. But other books like Garanda Samhita, Shiva Samhita, Siddha Siddhanta, there are many such books. Even the Hatha Pradipika, which is that standard for practicing yogic exercise, were all written by the Naths. I'm not saying because I belong to that, because Babaji didn't want me to think that I belong to that sampradaya. He said, even though I am, you don't have to belong to it. But it's a fact that these people saved the yogic textbooks, including the Kashmir Shaivism texts, which of course Lakshman Ju was the latest interpreter of it. He is no more. So this is what happened.
You know, it's interesting how you were saying when you met Babaji, how you had this feeling about him. And, you know, I've been fortunate and blessed to interact with a lot of, some people may call them holy people, but my experience has been that when you meet someone who is at that level of spiritual insight, a few things occur. One is dogma is no longer important. And two is that you have a sense of unconditional love. And that when you have this with an interaction with one of these individuals, it just puts you in this very calm, joyous state. And when you're in that state, I think that results in this condition that then allows you to gain insights. Mm-hmm. And it sounds as though this is on some level what happened. Now, the interesting thing, I think, though, for some people is that they may have an experience like that, but they have not dealt with their ego. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then it becomes a way of elevating themselves as I'm important, my belief is important, my relationship with this person is important, and this is a delusion, of course.
If I may, this probably, it was pointed out to me that is a danger which one needs to avoid if one needs to expand. You're right. Then what happens is, because suddenly you find that you're kind of free and you're not dependent on anybody, and there is something vast coming your way, you're not still there. And then you start having some experiences and you feel that you're better than everybody else. Now, this is a danger which has to be sorted out, and I think warnings have been there everywhere in all the teachings. In fact, you know Kabir Das was a great weaver saint of Banaras, who again had something like my history because he was born in a Muslim family. He took initiation from Ramananda of Banaras. The Ram mantra was given to him, but he was a meditator. In his poems you find a lot of descriptions about the nadis and the channels and the centers and the lotuses. And he said something very interesting in Hindi. It really sounds good. He said, "बुरा जो देखने मैं चला, बुरा न मिलिया कोई, जब दिल खोजा अपना मुझसा बुरा न कोई." That means I went looking for evil, everywhere. I couldn't find it. Then I opened my heart and here it sat inside me. The ego. This is something, I think fame, ego and shame are according to the teachers, they are the last obstacles which one has to carefully look at, especially when suddenly you feel that you have something which others don't have, and it may be energy which is not visible immediately, but something is there. It can blow up the ego. You're right, absolutely right. I have seen this happen before, and you have to constantly be on guard with yourself to see that it doesn't happen. Unless there's nothing to do.
Well, I think one of the other interesting things is, and oftentimes the type of people you're describing, they think they have to have proximity to the guru for their elevation. But the interesting thing is, a true guru, I think, appreciates he can learn the greatest lessons from perhaps what is perceived as the lowest person.
True, very true. And also in my case, I consider Maheshwarnath Babaji as a wonderful teacher, because from the beginning he made sure that I was not dependent on him. You see, he said, I'm not training you to become dependent. Stand on your own feet, And once, there were many times when he really did this to me in a way which I realized it deeply. One of the earliest was, we have time, right?
We have plenty.
In 1.5 years after I was with him, I was completely dependent. I worshipped him. And then one day he called me and he said, "Get out." I said, "But Babaji, where do I go? Because I have burnt my boats and I'm here and there's nothing left for me to go. Where do I go?" He said, "No, get out. You have become too dependent on me. You have to go and be on your own." I was 21 years old, 20. So I said, okay, so I felt very upset actually. So I took my little bag and my kamandalu, which is the water pot, and I just walked out. And I was alone. I walked towards Uttarkashi. I wanted to go to Kedarnath, so the other direction. No, sorry, to Gomukh. So as I was going, I felt, now I'm free. It rained. I got completely wet, and I said, "Well, this is how a yogi should be. You should get wet. When the sun comes, you get, all those things." And then I walked, and I saw some white peacocks. They have hence disappeared because of the dams and things that have come in. Playing, about few of them dancing around. It was tremendous. And somebody came to me, one sadhu, and said, "I'm also walking that side." So I said, "Please, I don't want to talk to you," because they keep talking. So I said, "Can I shut up and walk? You go your way." "Yeah, let me go my way," that kind. So, and then I was walking through a particularly lonely place. It was evening. I started off early in the morning. I felt someone walking behind me, So I thought, no, somebody's walking behind me, so I'm not going to talk to them. So then they came closer and stopped. So I stopped. I was a little concerned. What is this? Then I heard the familiar sound. See, when Babaji initiated me into his teachings, he called me Madhukar Nath, because the Naths have to have a Nath at the end. So he said Madhukar Nath was the name given to me. And the short form is Madhu. So he used to always call me Madhu. And Madhu in Sanskrit also means honey. So, so when he said Madhu, and that sound, the voice was unmistakable, so I knew, this is Babaji. So I really was upset. I said, "Why has he come behind me?" He said, "Get out." So I was determined not to turn back, but I did. And then he said to me, he put one hand on my shoulder and he said to me, "But where are you going?" I said, "I don't know. You said go, I'm going. I mean, is there a direction to go? I'm going." So then he said, "But so you're going because I asked you to go?" I said, "Yes." Then he said, "Serves no purpose, so you're still dependent."
Because you told me.
Yeah. And then he said, "Okay, so if I ask you to come back, are you going to go back?" You know what? In my mind, I was thinking I'm going to say no, but when I said yes. So then he put his hand on my shoulders and, "Come on, let's go. I wanted to try this out." And in the 3 years I was with him, 2-3 times he had sent me away to different places. Then I felt better because I had learned how to handle this. The first experiment was bad. It was almost a disaster. So I learned this, and therefore I say to all my friends who are with me, the group which joins, the Satsang, the people, I said, please don't become dependent. For God's sake, keep away from this. You have to stand on your own feet, learn for yourself. I can help you out in some way maybe, but finally it has to come from inside, because otherwise you would be just worshipping me and doing nothing. That's my understanding, please.
It's interesting. One time I had been with the Dalai Lama for a period of time. And then, I don't know if you know Eckhart Tolle.
Yes.
And I was with Eckhart
I haven't
Tolle.
met him, but I've heard.
And at both of these things, there was a woman there, and she was clearly a wealthy woman. And I found it interesting because I watched her, and her whole motivation was to get as close as possible. And so I did an event at Stanford, and we had a dinner afterwards, and she suddenly showed up there. And she said, I see that you're with the Dalai Lama and he seems close to you. I saw you with Eckhart Tolle. Clearly there's something about you. She says, I want you to be my guru. And I looked at her and I said, are you serious? So she said, yes, absolutely. And I said, well, but you have to really confirm to me that you're serious about this. And she says, oh no, I'll do anything because, I have to learn and I have to gain these insights. And I said, that's wonderful. I said, then I'm going to give you a task. And if you successfully complete the task, then we will see what manifests. So I said, I'm going to give you a list of 100 books. And I want you to spend 4 hours a day reading. Then I want you to spend 4 hours a day thinking about what you read and writing in a journal. And then I want you to spend 2 hours meditating. And she goes, but you mean I don't get to be with you? I said, no, you have to do this as the start. And she says, oh my God, well, but after doing this, what will happen? What will happen? And I said, well, if you're diligent about it and you're serious, then you will find you don't need me at all. And very few people are.
That's true. People don't know. People don't want, it's basically a shortcut that people seek. So they don't want to work on this because it is a hard work.
Yeah.
They think that there must be something where you can grab, it's so close. And Babaji told me a story. He said, I repeat it in many satsangs. There was this young man who went to a guru and said, sir, I want to become your disciple. So he said, okay, fine. So what am I supposed, just like you said, in a different Indian context, he said, what is a disciple supposed to do? He said, early in the morning, you wake up, cut wood, bring it here for me, go have a dip in the cold waters of the Ganga, then clean up the kutir, the hut where we live, and so on and so on. And this guy is waiting to think, where is the food coming now? There was no mention of food. And then he went on and on. And then he said, there's 2 hours of study. Okay. And then there is 1 hour of meditation. So he's wondering, and what do we do next? And then he said, 1 minute, sir, I don't think I can do this. Is there some way to become a guru? So he said, you have nothing to do, just sit and bless people. He said, then please make me the guru. So this is similar to this, it's very strange. Sometimes I begin to wonder if people are really seriously searching for something, or is it a...
Well, no, I think you're right. I think there are people who are constantly searching, but they still have delusion and attachment and emptiness, not the type of emptiness of the void,
I understand.
but just an emptiness of spirit.
They need to
fill
it up.
And again, I think it also gets back to this issue of being superior, because oftentimes the guru is believed to be special or beyond. And any real guru will say quite the opposite. Right? So I thought it was interesting because I know you go by Sri M or M, and I think you made a comment one time that you've mentioned one M, which is, yes, the second one is the name given to you by
Madhukarnath.
Yes, and then the third is it Manav?
Manav, which means a human being.
Yes.
Oh, you remember so well. We met only for half an hour last time.
That's how I do these interviews. I have to remember these things. But I think that's interesting because ultimately, when you accept that you're just another traveler and another human being, it keeps you from your own ego getting
grounded.
Yes.
Be grounded.
Yes, but I think that is important because you see some people who want to be surrounded by people who glorify them, and I think there are some, if you will, gurus who accept this because it is helpful for some people that they see them in this manner. But I think that it's like the person who likes to be surrounded by people who tell them how important they are and how smart they are, similar to our president. Versus, I would like to believe, and I hope that I was trying to surround myself with people who are smarter and people who actually confront you, because that's, I think, the place where you learn the most.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, I think in some of the textbooks on the religious practices in India, like the Gita and so on, they lay a stress on treating praise and blame as equal and not getting caught up. Because if you keep praising somebody, like flattering somebody, after a while the person begins to believe that it is so. Now this is a danger. If you are on a spiritual path, otherwise it's okay. But it's for 100 days, if every morning somebody gets up and says, "You're God," then on the 101st day you might really think you're God. So Babaji gave me this warning just before I left him, when he asked me to go back to the plains. He said, it doesn't matter what people think about you, because now you're going, you have something in you which may attract people. But it's all right what they think about you. You can't change that, because people can form any opinion about it. The moment you start believing what they think about you, you're sunk. He said, watch out carefully. So I'm absolutely careful about this. Some people really, because especially in India, it's a common thing to praise. Nobody likes criticism. So I think when you're criticized, then it's actually somebody is pointing out, right or wrong, that you're not okay. There's something wrong, and that's where you can correct yourself, right? So we should be open to that, I think, personally, because then otherwise we are stuck. The word used is stuti, ninda. Stuti is praise and ninda is blame. So keep everything. This is from the Gita. It says, stuti, the Mauni is one who considers stuti and ninda as one, because he is not dependent on that. Sorry.
No, I think that there are two issues. One is that's an exercise in non-attachment, either seeking praise or seeking blame, but treating everything as one and not getting lost in either. I think the other aspect, which in some ways I think you've alluded to, is at least in my own limited experience, I have not met an enlightened person. I've met people who approximate that. And of course, as soon as someone tells you they're enlightened, you need to turn around and run as fast as you can, I think sometimes in the other direction.
On this context, my daughter called me up day before yesterday and asked me, this word enlightened used so often, Papa, but are you enlightened? Some people said you're enlightened. I said, sorry, you have to find out for yourself, because I don't think I am. She said, no, but this can't be. But I saw it in one of the videos that somebody said about enlightenment, and they said, you fit the picture, and you didn't say a word. I said, I didn't say a word because I couldn't say a word. So you can't say, these things, and it's difficult to define this enlightenment thing. How can we define? What is it to be defined?
Well,
I don't know. Personally, I can't define this. The moment you start defining it, then you're moving away, I think.
Well, I think perhaps that you become enlightened when you disappear into the void. Because then there is, in some ways, emptiness, but in some ways, everything.
Yeah. But then it can't be translated into ordinary words. I mean, if something like that happens, it's difficult to say what happened. Words fail.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Yeah.
It's fail because it needs nothing, no support. I was also fortunate to have a small dialogue with the Dalai Lama. I think it was there on the YouTube many years ago. Before I started this walk in India, I met His Holiness in Delhi. So we were discussing this about the shunyata of the Buddhists in fact, I didn't want, after 10 minutes I said, I think I should move, there are lots of people. He said, there's nobody here, sit down. So, like a normal, then we discussed, and I said, the Upanishads say that the truth is that which even the mind cannot reach. He said, no, wait a minute. It probably means the mind cannot define. It can't be the mind. If the mind can't reach that, what is it to me? It's there and I'm here and it's finished. So I said, perhaps it means not the ordinary mind. I said, there, I can understand that. But, and then we were discussing, and he said to me something which really struck me. He said, he met the Panchen Lama after many years, 25 years or so, in the Chinese jail he was let off. And then they were talking to each other, and he said to him, at any time during this 25 years, did you have fear? Did you fear anything? So he said, I was myself quite surprised with the answer. He said, yes, I had this fear 3 times during this period when I was under arrest in the Chinese prisons. I said, what was the fear? He said, I feared that I might end up hating these guys. This is, it was like for a second I just kept quiet. I didn't know what to say. And then he himself tapped me on my shoulder and said, hey, wake up.
You were so enthralled by what he was saying.
Yeah, because can you imagine somebody being tortured day in and day out, and his fear is that he wouldn't end up hating the other guy?
Yes, in fact, actually I had a similar conversation with His Holiness, and in fact, in his telling of it to me, he was saying that he had tears because, again, it was a fear that he would lose his compassion. And, it shows you how I think a trained mind, it's like Nelson Mandela, when he was in prison for 27 years. When he left, he said he had no anger towards his captors. And I think being able to have that depth of love and non-judgment and acceptance, actually that is probably what approximates enlightenment. You've met a number of spiritual teachers that are fairly well known. Neem Karoli
Baba, short
Yeah.
while, very short while. Just one visit. That was in Vrindavan when I met him from a distance, and he told me to come and sit on his lap, and he gave me a rotten apple to eat. I mean, that's about it. And he kept telling everybody, this is Babaji's bacha, Babaji's boy, and that's about it.
And how was the rotten apple?
It was nice. I thought it was quite nice. He pulled it out from inside that blanket which he always had. And for a second I was worried how to eat this thing. It looked dirty and it was inside the blanket and half worm-eaten kind of. So I was holding it in my hand, wondering. Then he said, eat! In Hindi, khao. So I ate it. That was very short. But then I had met some other people like Chidananda, Swami Chinmayananda, twice the Dalai Lama, when I was leaving Maheshwarnath Babaji, my guru, he had wanted me to meet a couple of people and stay with them. And the last one on the list was Jiddu Krishnamurti. So I spent about a year or so, more than that, 3 years during the last part of his life, living in the headquarters of the Krishnamurti
Is
Foundation.
that in Ojai?
In India.
In India.
In
okay.
India, the headquarters in India, in Adyar, near the Theosophical, not inside, separate. So I think I also, Babaji sent me to him because there was much to learn from this man. You know, I noticed that there was something about him, just I felt he was like a shadow. I mean, he was not there. But I got many valuable, I would say he swept away many cobwebs. Then I realized why I was asked to go there. So he was the last person I met. After that, I didn't have any desire to go and meet anybody, and there was nobody on the list anyway. So I've had some very interesting. Sometimes Krishnamurti, can I say something? Sometimes Krishnamurti comes across as being a little impatient and arrogant, but really not so. Since I watched at close quarters, he was ready to admit his mistakes, which is a big thing, because who would do that at that stature? You know, he was like gospel truth, whatever he said, people will. But he was ready to say, yeah, maybe I'm wrong. So, for instance, and he never tried to change me, or I didn't want to become a, in quotes, Krishnamurtite.
Right.
But I grasped quite a lot of things from. In one of the talks, he said that there's nothing in these books of yours, these religious books, throw them into the sea. Okay, fine. So everybody was listening. And the third day, last day, he said he has not read any of these books. So I said, so when he came back in the evening, I was like personally attending on him. I was very young at that time and he was almost 90. So I went to him and I was giving him some oil for his knees. There was some pain in the knees, some Ayurvedic oil. I said, sir, I want to ask you something. He said, don't bother me. Then he said, okay, what's it? So I said, sir, I think there's something wrong in this. The first day you say that you have not, there's nothing in these books, throw them into the sea. 2 days later you say that you have not read them. Now if you have not read them, how would you know there's nothing in them? You know, it's a very simple common sense question. He said, oh, just a minute, I don't need them. I said, sir, that's a different story. You don't need them, but there may be somebody who needs them. So when you speak, people consider it like gospel truth. So I think you should be a little careful with what you say. I thought he's going to really send me out. You know, yeah, get out, you know nothing. You know what he said? You're right, sir. He said, I think I must be more careful about what I am saying. And I was stunned because he didn't have to say that. I was nobody. You know?
But it's interesting because having met many spiritual leaders and having met non-spiritual leaders but profound people, many who are not educated but who have a depth of knowing, for some people you don't need anything. And I think for other people they evolve by learning much, and I think that's very true. Again, getting back to what we were speaking about earlier, this ego thing of, I've had actually people say to me, because I'm an atheist, I'm a non-believer in anything, but in some ways I'm a believer in everything. And who am I to judge? But I've had people come up to me and they say, well, I see that you're close to the Dalai Lama. How is this possible that you're not a Buddhist? Or I don't know if you know Amma. I know Amma and I'm close to her and others. But I know nothing about there. And my statement is, because these people say, you know, I've followed this person for 20 years. I've never had a private conversation. Why is it that you can have this closeness? And I said, well, one is I'm seeking nothing. I have an open heart and I care. And I said, if that is what you can embrace, then you've learned most of what you need to know. And but people forget that. They think it's a matter of memorizing an enormous list
True.
of dogma, which I don't think is,
Required.
they can be beneficial, but it's certainly not required. And this is, we're getting back to Krishnamurti, I think, and in some ways it's like, why are there different religious practices? Because different people need different things to fulfill their own, if you will, spiritual path. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is you did this walk of peace in 2015 from Kanyakumari to Kashmir.
Yeah,
Yes,
in the north.
7,500 kilometers.
Yeah.
And
it took us about a year and 4 months.
yes, and you did this in honor of Swami Vivekananda.
Well, we started from the Vivekananda Kendra in Kanyakumari. But I did this, in a way honoring him because he had walked the length and breadth of India. I wanted to also go and see what's the actualities in this country of ours, which has so many religions, so many conflicting theories, I mean hundreds of them, and so many political agendas. So this is the reason why I went, and basically it was a peace walk. I wanted to convey this, that you may belong to different religions, different political ideologies, but can we do it, what you have to do, peacefully instead of resorting to violence? This is my message. And I think I could give little bit, plant the seeds, but more than that, I think there were many people walking with me. We learned more. We learned many things. And I can no longer think of, at least in India, my country, as I thought about it before I started the walk. There are many things which have changed. I found that, really speaking, nobody wants to have violence or create discord. I found out that it was all political. That's the one big lesson I learned. It's completely political. It might appear as what in India is called a communal conflagration, which means one religion against other, but that's on the surface. Deep down, it's politics. For oaths and for so this is one big thing which I discovered, among other things, of course.
Of course, the question is, how do we overcome that?
It's difficult. This also I discovered. It's very difficult as long as we have the system where people come to power through oaths, majority. There's no other way. I don't know if there is any other way, but this is the best we have. But there is this innate danger that as long as you depend on oaths to come to power, you split people, because one against the other, because you want someone to vote for you. The other guy may be in a minority, so you don't care. You see, these are some of the things that we learn. I think there may be a solution if at least a dozen people stand up and say that power is not important for us, but we want to serve the nation. Difficult to find. That's the problem. And like, if you're in politics, you need to be also quite intelligent and quite, in a way, conniving, because you're facing the other guy who is like you. But deep down, if you're pure and you have no selfish motives, then perhaps something can be done. But I don't know where there are such leaders. Difficult to say.
No, I think that's right. And they, unfortunately, as we were talking about earlier, there are many paths to spirituality or enlightenment, and it's the manipulation of one's ego to pitch you against another. And the nature, unfortunately, of how we evolved as a species is this, I think, sense of tribalism, and one against another, which early in the evolving of our species was beneficial, but now actually it's not beneficial at all.
I think we need to move forward.
Yes. But the other aspect is, though, and what has allowed, I think, atrocities to occur is because, though, most people are afraid. to stand out and to say this is unjust, because one is it's their own fear of danger, and the other is their desire to benefit. And that's this constant.
This fear of danger I can understand, because politics is such a field, you can be bumped off. Even Martin Luther King was bumped off. So even in my case, I'm a little careful with this, because that's not my main thing. My main thing is the spiritual. But you can't say I'm spiritual and not care for what's happening. This is not possible if you are sensitive. But then I have to keep a balance, because I think I need to work for many more years and I don't want to end it now.
But getting to that, I was commenting I was an atheist, but I think that, at least for me, it's not about believing in one dogma, it's about this overreaching principle, I think, that brings all religions together, which is love, compassion, and this concept of our existence on some level being an illusion, and understanding that we arise from nothingness and go to nothingness. And maybe this is a segue into your book, your latest book. Fiction or non-fiction, I'm not sure which.
Because when I was interviewed, when the book came out, they asked me, why did you go into fiction? I said, because I'm tired of stating facts and nobody seems to take it. So then we go into fiction. And in fiction, you have a little freedom more than the facts. No, you can say if something is wrong and somebody mistakes you, you can say, well, this is fiction, come on. So that's one thing. The other is, recently there has been a beautiful book which I was reading called Sapiens by
Harari.
Very nice. Some points, some of the things there, because he's an anthropologist. It's about, he says, the whole of this ordering of civilization and organizations probably started when people started lying. I mean, in the sense, not lying in the sense that fiction, like the chimpanzee cannot fictionalize. A chimp can't, but human beings, then they have heaven, they have hell, they have invented many things out of imagination. And the imagination has to be so real for people to really believe it. That also some way kind of influenced me to write fiction. I said, some things which I can't write factually, maybe, but it's difficult to say, because some of my factual books, like my autobiography, sometimes sound like fiction. Yeah. So the dividing line between them, I think, is very, very narrow. And about atheism, we talked about. Right now I'm working on the next book, because Amazon wants another book. This time they wanted non-fiction, and I'm working seriously in a way scholarly manner, because I'm doing a lot of research on this. The title of the book would be Yoga for the Godless, because yoga, which is derived from Sankhya, basically, except the practices are added on mostly, doesn't have much of a concept of Ishvara, or God as creator. It's more to do with purifying your mind, cleaning your system, so that you become free. It's not such an important part of this yogic practice. Why I'm doing this is because very often cults take up the practice of yoga and turn it into something religious, which is okay as long as it doesn't disrupt. But when it becomes disruptive, then even politics, we have the right and the left, and the right can always use yoga and religion as one of their calling card. But it's not so. Yoga has nothing to do with it.
Well, this is in some ways my view, which is, one, any practice that offers benefit to another and to others, I cannot argue with. But that being said, you can feel content, you can feel happy, usually if you define your life as being of service to others, then that is ultimately the highest pinnacle, and you don't need any God or God-like entity to allow you to do that. Getting back, I think you've commented on what you call neurotheology,
I don't know much about it, but
Well, it's interesting because there is a body of work on this. And if you look at the evolution of our species, we have two aspects. One is a very good memory, and the result of having a very good memory is regret. And the other is a perception of death,
right.
which for many people is frightening. So what happens for many people is that mentally they spend most of their time with regret or fear.
New way of looking at it.
Yeah. And so some people would argue that this concept of religion is to diminish
This fear?
fear of death. Because if you believe that when you die, you either have a karmic existence of rebirth, or you go to heaven, or you're in some other blissful, wonderful place that rewards you for being a good person, it allows you to escape that fear. In fact, there's a body of evidence that shows that religious people live longer. And in some ways, though, whether for good or bad, if you are able to decrease fear and anxiety, and this is what meditation offers you, you become less stressed. These inflammatory proteins, which are associated with chronic disease, decrease. These hormones, which are associated with stress and anxiety, which are released on a chronic level in people who are anxious, are all very detrimental to your health. So if you have bliss based on a lack of fear of death, then that can actually benefit you physiologically, but it could also have negative consequences, because if you use that bliss to justify negative behaviors, that of course is a problem. There's a philosopher which you might like named Dennett, and actually he's a very outspoken atheist actually, but he talks about something called the gold army and the silver army. And I may confuse these, but if I recall correctly, it's this idea people go to war with absolute belief, they're fearless, right? Because they can go forward and are afraid of nothing, because death is meaningless, because ultimately death leads to afterlife. While the silver army, they're much more entwined with our present reality and thoughtful about consequences.
Survival.
Yes. So it's an interesting.
But don't you think there's also the other side, that if you believe in heaven and hell, suppose, you also filled with great fear, and your whole life is spent trying not to do this, not to do that, because you might go to hell.
But that's the purpose of religion too, to create a moral, ethical framework of behavior. And that's why there are some people, religious people, who say that their religion, or whatever religion, is absolutely necessary for you to live a moral, ethical life. There are other people like Sam Harris and others who, and myself, who say you don't need any religious foundation.
You can be ethical anyway.
Yes. So you can be a wonderful, kind, caring person without this. And this is
The Buddhists,
yeah.
they don't have a concept of Ishvara or a creator God, but ethics is so important. The Jains, case in point, because in my research I figured out that even before the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, there was the Yogacara school of Buddhists, and before that the Jains, who are called the Shramanas, who have a complete literature, yogic literature, of practice and theory. So it is, what I'm trying to say is not dependent on that. That's what I'm trying to say. It could be independent. Could be. Yeah.
So you practice Kriya Yoga?
I do.
And
That's what I learned from Babaji. Yeah.
And this idea of Kundalini?
Now in our teachings of Kriya Yoga, there are two sections. There is one in which you just deal with the mind or slash brain. It's purifying the mind, taking it to the level of the Mahat, and then Buddhi, and then to the Atma. This is one lineage, one kind. The other believes that if this has to happen, the Kundalini has to arise. Now, the other side is not agreeable to this. They say there is bliss, of course, but that bliss need not necessarily be accompanied by something moving up or down. It's not required. But I cannot deny the fact that there is something which does get activated. Whether it moves up like a snake or not, this is a controversial thing, but something definitely gets ignited, and it has I can't talk to you about this probably because you know more about the nerves than I do, but I think it has also something to do with the parasympathetic nervous system, not just the central, and maybe the vagus nerve. These pleasurable feelings that you get in the different plexuses, which are called the chakras. So for me it's a reality, and Kriya does deal with it in some way.
No, I think you're exactly right, and I think there are a number of studies that demonstrate now that when you can put yourself into the state, whether it's using Kriya Yoga or other types of practices, what happens is it shifts you from stimulation of your sympathetic nervous system, where you have stress, anxiety, and all these very negative effects. We talked about how we evolved as a species, and certainly when we were on the savannah in Africa and we saw a lion, these types of responses were very appropriate, but they're not beneficial today, and they actually impede a lot of people from their own path, because if you are in a constant state of fear and anxiety, you cannot focus on being present, which means connection, and you cannot relax.
Would you say that this is also to do with the limbic system, which is your
Yes.
defense system?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And as you pointed out, you were talking about the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic system, is when you use, as an example, Kriya Yoga, it allows you to stimulate your vagus nerve, increase its tone, which shifts you from this fear state to the state of bliss. And this is when your physiology works its best, because you see what happens is when you're in this state, several things happen. One is your physiology works much better, your cardiac function, your peripheral vascular function, your immune system. But the other thing that happens, there are three. One is your executive control area in your brain, which is associated with discerning thought, where you make more clear decisions, works at its best. When you're in a fear state, you limit your options. Two is, we know that when you are in this state, again, because you have access to memory and you're much more thoughtful, you're more creative, and ultimately you're more productive. And this is why I think, based on science now, we have demonstrated what many of the spiritual and religious practices who do things such as Kriya Yoga, other breathing techniques, other types of meditation techniques, it has a profound, profound effect, a positive effect for many people.
Now I've got a chance to talk to you. This is something you can, I'm still not sure where the vagus nerve is. Where?
So the vagus nerve begins in your brainstem, lower down, and it essentially goes to every organ in your body.
Okay, it has now endings coming out.
Yes, but and especially in the heart.
Okay.
The other thing is, it's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. So it also interprets things that are going on in your body, and then allows you to have a brain response.
Okay.
And
it works independent of the parasympathetic?
It's part of the parasympathetic. You see, so what we call the autonomic nervous system, which comprises the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system, they are part of the system. When it says autonomic, it means below the level of consciousness, typically. But the extraordinary thing is that while generally it was developed from our evolution, because we have so much data coming in, we can't concentrate on breathing, we can't concentrate on making our heart beat. it created a system that allows these to automatically happen. But with practice, you can influence them, and you can allow yourself to shift from this stress mode to this more relaxed, or what they call the rest and digest system. So yes, the vagus nerve starts in your brainstem, essentially goes to every organ in the body.
Is there any main location of it?
Oh yeah, there you have one on each side.
Oh, there are two.
Down. Yes, yes. And just like, you have symmetry, the nerves in your brainstem go to each part of your face, right? So yes, you have two. And we're learning even more now. As an example, over the last few years, we've learned that even what you eat has an influence. And in fact, there is some evidence that based on certain type of gut bacteria, that it can have an effect on your mental state. And you can change that through diet. But of course, what we have also learned, and whether this is good or bad, is that 80% of our illnesses are due to our behavior. So if you can master your behavior, which means exercise, diet, belief, you will get rid of most illnesses. But in Western medicine, because we have a capitalistic system, the pharmaceutical industry actually is against that. And in fact, we do not have a system of health, which actually, if you look at Ayurvedic and other traditions, they talk about a system of wellness. We have a system of illness in the West.
Yeah, since we're on the subject, have they found out some kind of, some way by which it can be, the vagus nerve, for instance, can be made more active or something? No? From by external sources?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I have been approached by venture capitalists who want to create a product.
A product
that stimulates your vagus nerve.
Electrical. Or
yes, and now there is.
This is what I was trying to figure out.
Yes, so there is a way you can do that, and it's actually used to actually treat certain types of seizures. But the idea here would be to utilize it to stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system to receive the health benefit. The interesting thing, though, is one of the most important aspects of that benefit has to do with being in a compassionate mind state, and you cannot bypass that. So there is something that is called heart rate variability, and this is not different heart rates, it's the rate of variability between a heartbeat. If that is more irregular, this interbeat variability, that means actually your parasympathetic nervous system is stimulated. Really? And yes, but again, so far you cannot achieve that state unless you're in a state of compassion, hopefully for yourself and of course for others. And one of the challenges is that in Western society especially, most people beat themselves up. They're very critical of themselves. When you beat yourself up, it's hard to be compassionate to others, and it's very self-focused.
Because you're not full. So if you're not full, what will we give?
Exactly. So I think that's the point. So let's talk about the void. Which in some ways I think we've been heading towards. In your book, we're at the end, Sunya goes to the void, and he states he's going there. What is this a metaphor for?
Well, in this book, which is a story, of course, when Shunya goes into the void, simply means that he is no more visible to us. That's what it means. That doesn't mean he's not there somewhere. And because in the beginning, this character called Shunya, when he comes, and somebody asks him, what's your name? He says, I'm Shunya. So where do you come from? He says shunya doesn't come from anywhere and doesn't go anywhere. It's no thing, and nothing but no thing. And so therefore in the end he goes back to, nobody knows where he came from. He goes back to where he came from. We don't know where. I mean, this is the concept. This is the one concept. The other concept which I am trying to work out is that void is not nothing, but it's the essence of everything. And therefore this man being here or not being here is not so important. The crystallization of it is not so important. As a concept, it's there everywhere all the time. And I don't know if you notice at the end that there is this doctor, a neurologist who studies this, and he says, where have I seen this man before? Because he's looking at the picture.
And he's had a patient.
Yes, he said, I have seen him as a patient. Now, I'm also trying to say that what we think, some people we think are patients may not be really patients, but somebody who is not like other people, extraordinary. So we can't define them. So we kind of judge and say, oh, they are patient. They're not well. They're sick. They may not be. Maybe there's something which they can see which we can't see. I don't know, something similar to this. I'm trying to.
No, that was my impression. That one is that one thing that inhibits our ability to see clarity is our own judgments. Our own judgments are a manifestation of our own delusion and sense of self-import. And when you can be in that non-judgmental state, which means you then you have no fear about an interaction, you're able to offer unconditional love, that is the ultimate highest.
I think because you don't have anything to defend, and you don't mind what the other person thinks, because that's okay. I mean, people can think in different ways. So this is probably what I'm trying to convey through shunya. And now there's a demand for a sequence. Now I'm only wondering if I have a sequence, it will destroy the shunya which we created. But
so does he have to come back?
Yeah. So
now we have a TV series.
This is what the publisher says. The Westland books, which are part of Amazon, they say, why don't we have a sequel? I said, but then I have to bring him back from where he vanished. He said, yeah, bring him back, he can vanish again. Then I said, then you would ask for another sequel then. So it becomes endless. It's like, as you said, a TV serial.
Yes.
So I know, I'm just thinking about.
So I know he manifested near a toddy shop.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with toddy shops. Maybe you can explain that, and we'll close on toddy shops.
A toddy shop, in India, and not India so much, but in Kerala, which is the southern coastal part of India, there is this kind of an icon called the toddy shop. Now, there was a time when there were no liquor other than toddy available, alcohol. Even now they call it Indian made foreign liquor for all the other rum and gin and everything that comes. So it was only toddy that was available, which is actually, before it ferments, it's a very healthy drink. It's from the coconut tree or from the palm tree. They climb up and they chop the top of the bud that comes, and they leave a pot there so that it drips into it. And it's very sweet before fermenting. And then they make it ferment and it becomes toddy. It's slightly stronger than beer, but less than wine, perhaps somewhere in between. So that is a good idea. So, toddy can be horrid and toddy can be good. It depends on how you make it and how long you have kept it and so on. Now, these little toddy shops are basically like little stalls, like small rooms run by an individual, and they have their own kitchen because people want to eat and think. And sometimes when we were young in college, we found out that the tastiest food perhaps is in the toddy shop, because these guys, when they drink toddy, they want good food. So, and it's cheap because it's not meant for high level people, it's meant for the ordinary folk. So lots of them, Kerala is a Marxist state. Even now it's ruled by the Marxists.
I didn't realize that.
Yes,
Wow.
yes, it's a communist state even before Calcutta. So In fact, the first chief minister, the Marxist chief minister of Kerala, has the same name and from the same not family but the same tradition as Shankara, the writer of the Upanishads, who was a Nambudiri Brahmin, and this man's name was Shankaran Nambudripad, E. Shankaran Nambudripad, but he was a Marxist. I mean, he went to the Pathshala, he read a lot of these things, but he became a Marxist. So, we have a big presence there, and why I wanted to mention this is much of the Marxist strategies were done and discussed in toddy shops because these guys were not so overtly religious, so they don't mind going and sitting in toddy shops, you know. So, it's like in rural areas especially, you don't find them much in cities, but if you go a little into the suburban and the rural areas, you will find these little toddy shops where people come and have a toddy and then they speak, and all kinds of things are discussed there. And generally holy men don't go to a toddy shop. So, I wanted to place Shunya right there. But you notice that he doesn't drink toddy.
No.
He drinks black tea,
right.
But he doesn't mind living there at the backyard of a toddy shop and meet all the other guys who have toddy. He has no problem out there. You see, so I wanted, in fact, I'm going to confess to you that when I first started writing the book, Shunya was drinking toddy. Then I cut it off and said, let him have black tea, because then if he drinks toddy, whatever he says, people think he must have been drunk. So, I got that out because he was drunk in a different way. He didn't need toddy to get drunk. So, you know, drinking, we also drink in some way.
Oh, yeah.
A different thing. So, this is what a toddy shop is all about. If you go to rural Kerala, you will find them.
I'm going to have to check that out. So, in some ways.
But please tell me if you're going, because some of the toddy can be terrible, but I can recommend good places.
I'm glad you know. So in some ways, ultimately, it's interesting because the toddy shop is in some ways a metaphor to connect, I think, with actually the nature of human beings.
Yes.
And then you have, if you will, this enlightened person or close to enlightenment, and it allows this connection.
Interaction.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful.
That was the reason why.
So, you know, my book was called Into the Magic Shop. Maybe your next book should be Into the Toddy Shop.
But that book, Christine gave me and I read it. It's a very, very interesting book, I must say. Even before I met you, I started reading it last time. It's a beautiful book.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, especially what I found it, this I don't know what to call it. There's something out of the box. It's not like linear. It's linear means something is there and I'm here and I'm trying to get there. But this is like it's quite out of the box. It's like fuzzy logic, if you can say that. But that's what really affected me, because it's like some of the teachings of the Upanishad, for instance, they're not linear. It's not as if truth is there and you have to go and find it. It's here. So how do you find it? I mean, that's the question.
I think that's the question for all of us, but ultimately what it requires is you have to be able to see clearly. And I think that's what the path, helps us.
I think also when you say clearly, it means to sometimes keep ourselves out of it and look at it. Because
No, I think that's right. It's because we have to be careful because we have a tendency for delusion. So maybe on that
you know
note,
best on that.
Well, for all of you who have been listening, I want to thank you. I think our time actually has probably gone a bit over, but what a delightful discussion, and I want to thank you for spending the time with me, and it was very enjoyable.
And thank you very much for this, because I know you also have, your time is valuable and that you came and spent some time with me. Thank you very much.
All of our time is valuable. Thank you. Thank you all.